It's only one image, John. So how long could it take?
You want to bet? Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Guess who I am joined by again? It's Dr. Scott Walter here. We are going to talk not about SpaceX this time, but about Blue Origin and their competitor complement, whatever, to the human landing system by SpaceX, their Starship landing system. So anyway, yeah, Scott, we have a whopping one picture to look at today. So how far do you think we can dig into this little rabbit hole here?
Oh, come on. I mean, how long have we ever spent on a single image, John?
Yeah, no time at all.
It's not like we're obsessive or anything like that.
There you go. I want to say one little thing though. Tomorrow I'm driving down. I'm going to actually see you in person for the Falcon launch for the Arabsat 1. Is that the one? Arabsat 1, I believe.
It's one. I think they've done a few already.
Yeah, it's Arabsat something. Maybe it's Arabsat 2 or something. Anyway, but I'm going to be down there. So if anybody else is down in the area, definitely say hi. And I think we're going to get to test drive a Lucid down there. If we do, I'm taking my camera and we are going to do a really fun, test drive in the Lucid. So that'll be awesome because I've never been in one.
Yeah. So the launch is 11:30 p.m., almost midnight tomorrow.
Right.
And I think we'll be viewing it somewhere in the Titusville area.
Yep. Near the Max Brewer Bridge. So there you go. That's what we got at this point. So. So say hi if you're down there. Okay. But on to Blue Origin and your buddy, Jeff.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a look. So on Friday, and make sure I'm sharing here. On Friday, this tweet came out announcing that Blue Origin had won the contract for the second landing system for NASA. And so I kind of looked at it along with everyone else, and I was assuming there would be more detail, a bit more information. So basically, this is like all the information we have. And there was also a press conference that went along with it. That was about maybe a half hour long or so, in which they didn't add any more detail. So what we know is that Blue Origin has won it. And this is maybe some new information, is that they'll be solving the boil-off problem and making LOX liquid hydrogen as a storable propellant combination. So that means they are using hydrogen and not methane instead. Right. And that could be an interesting choice because it will probably be easier to manufacture liquid hydrogen on the moon from the water ice that's there. That should be down in some of the craters like Shackleton Crater. Methane is not so easy because there doesn't seem to be a rich source of carbon on the moon like there is at Mars. Right. So
yeah, and this is very, very backwards from Mars, of course. I guess actually LH2 would not be that difficult on Mars either because there supposedly is water under the surface.
Supposedly there is, yes.
But you can use the Sabatier process to extract methane out of the atmosphere of Mars. So very, very different.
And you still need hydrogen to be able to produce the methane anyway. And so there was CO2, and they at first was like, well, we have to probably bring the hydrogen with us from Earth in the first place to be able to manufacture the methane. It's just that the amount that you needed to bring was going to be a lot less than you would normally need for the full round trip, and you'd be able to create the oxygen and everything else. And then it's like, whoa, look, there's water on Mars, so we don't have to schlep the hydrogen along there as well. We can manufacture everything. So that's possible. Right. Yep.
But of course, as Jeff Bezos noted up here, so I think cryo storing LOX, which is liquid oxygen, is, not the simplest thing in the world, but it has been done. And certainly anyway, that's one problem. LH2, which is liquid hydrogen, is a whole different ballgame. It is an incredibly light and small molecule and loves to escape from everything.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Really tough to keep it in.
And it's just it is so cold. And even in the depths of space, it's hard to keep it cold enough to avoid boil off. So you have to do something. Now, we don't know too much about it. If you go to the Blue Origin website, you'll find a couple other details, but it's really not much. So it's very, very scant. And I thought it was the only one that had the inability to get the information, and it finds out like most of the others out there, they're looking at this. It's like, where's the info?
Yeah. Including Scott Manley, who always has all the info.
Yes.
He's limited to one picture. Yeah, so
He's limited. Yeah, it basically says it's one picture. So if we go to,
so
kind
we
of the
should
background,
maybe what we should first do. Yeah, I was going to say the
Yes.
other thing so here's the original, but we should definitely go through the pieces of the lander, but we can do that with these two. So yeah, here we go.
Right. To get an understanding. So if you remember, was it maybe 2 years ago when SpaceX won the competition, and they were kind of the dark horse. They came in the last minute, and they won it mainly because they're the only one that was able to bid under the actual budget. Right. And so you had Dynetics and the national team, which was led by Blue Origin. And there's a little bit of a kerfuffle over that whole thing and some lawsuits and everything else.
Right.
And then Congress decided, I guess, to give NASA enough money to come up with a second lander. And so it basically came down to then, the title bout between Dynetics and national team, which one was going to be able to get it.
Right.
It was really hard to tell. It was very close. And the main reason I bring these things up is that what we want to do is contrast the current design with the old design, and also a little bit with the SpaceX lander, just so we have an idea of proportion and everything else.
Unfortunately, this does not show them at all to scale. They are like those three craft are very, very different sizes.
Yes, so. we will kind of get to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this in fine detail to sort of see what's in there and what we can glean from that one picture, because at this point we're experts at turning one image into a 30 to 50 minute video. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, to get an idea of the scale of this before we really start looking really closely. So you see, I was able to get it a little bit larger than from the tweet. So that's not bad resolution. So here is what the current lunar Starship configuration looks like. They have bigger legs than they did in the original proposal, and a few other things. But we get an idea of the scale. And if you take that, so whoops, and there we go. If you stack three of them together, you get about the height. So it's about 1/3 the height. Right. As far as the dimensions, Starship is going to be 9 meters in diameter. And I think this, if I get the proportions right, because it's supposed to be 16 meters tall, will be about 6+ meters wide, a little bit less than 7, which is what it would need to fit into the fairing of New Glenn. Right. And that's crazy, is that everyone was looking for dimensions and no one even knows what the diameter is. But it seems like they know it's 16. And from here, we could almost clean out, because Starship is 50 meters. Right. So you see that's going to be about right.
And I think that there was an indication, of course, that Blue Origin wants to launch it on their New Glenn. So it would make sense that it would fit within that fairing size. Yeah. It's
going to have to fit. Absolutely. Okay. So this is the original design that was heavily criticized for many, many reasons. Right.
Completely unreusable also, aside from the very, very top ascent module, I believe.
I think so. So it was very much like the original lunar module, where you had a descent module and an ascent module. And so you can see here's an example that one of them has already come to the surface and left. So that's what would be left behind. So here's the descent stage. And I think at this time they were using methane, methyl locks. So you had an ascent stage here, and then the crew compartment was way up here. It reminds me of like the Alvin submarine. Right. And up there would have been the docking port to the lunar gateway. And so this is the crew compartment, and it's a little hard to see, but there's this real long ladder coming on down.
A terrifyingly long ladder.
Yeah, I think it was like almost 10 meters. So it was really long. So it was really criticized in how you'd be able to get up and down into that, and whether it was a good idea, which is why a lot of people liked the Dynetics, because it was almost like a front porch. You just kind of came out and went down a few steps. SpaceX, of course, was way up, but SpaceX proposed an elevator to be able to come down. Right. So
because again, SpaceX's Starship is 9 meter diameter, correct?
Right.
Yes. So you've got a much bigger volume, so you can put an elevator in there. You have room to do things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And the payload to surface was also a lot higher. Now, it's more than actually just 2 stages. And part of it might have been the fact that you had really 3 major teams are involved: Boeing, Lockheed, and Blue Origin. And each one of them wanted to have their own kind of component. So this is what the actual configuration was originally, in that, see, over here, you get the descent stage. You see this descent stage seems to be a different iteration of what's in the other image. Right. Here's the ascent stage. There's the descent stage. And there's this thing here, which is like a tug that's going to take it from the lunar gateway down to kind of a lower orbit. And then it descends from there. And everyone's like, what? I mean, we used to get down there with just 2 stages, and now they're proposing 3 stages. So it just seemed crazy to everyone. Now, part of the reason for that is that it's not like an Apollo. Apollo, I think, was maybe in like a 10-mile orbit or something like that. It wasn't very high above the lunar surface because it didn't have to be. There's no atmosphere.
Right.
So it was a lot closer, and that meant the delta V you needed to get down to the surface and back to the surface is pretty low because you're already pretty close. But now it's going to be in this, what do they call it? It's near rectilinear halo orbit.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a funky orbit around the Lagrange point between the Earth and the Moon. So it's the point where the gravity of the Earth and the Moon exactly equal one another. So it's like being at the top of the hill. You can either fall this direction or you can fall that direction. And so because you're much higher, the delta V to get down to the surface is a lot more, and they get back up. So the idea is that this stage would have soaked up a lot of that delta V, so you didn't have to put so much propellant in these. But a lot of people didn't like it because it seemed like it was more processes, it was more complexity and everything else. And now it's changed quite a bit. So contrasting the two, so we can kind of look at it. I think they're roughly the same size. And one of the first major differences, what is the first major difference you see, John?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that the crew compartment has now been placed on the bottom instead of the top. That's the number one big thing that's happened. Yeah.
Yes. So that's a major change. And then the other thing is because the crew compartment is down here, you have this nice little porch with not a ladder, but with stairs going down.
Right.
So from the standpoint of ergonomics, it's going to be much easier for egress and ingress. Absolutely. So that's much better. And anything else that jumps out to you right away, something that we were kind of talking about a couple of weeks ago, should have brought that T-shirt.
Which is what thing? I mean, I'm really stuck.
How many stages does this have? This looks like it's a single stage to orbit.
Yes,
actually,
exactly.
it's more. It's a single stage to land, and to orbit. So the understanding, and everyone's been looking out there to see if there's still a tug up there that's going to be bringing it down, and it looks like this will go straight from the gateway down to the surface and then back up.
Right.
Single stage. So, on the Moon, single stage to orbit is really quite feasible and fairly easy to do. Like I say, it can be done on the Earth, but you probably wouldn't have much payload.
Right.
But in this case, they're going ahead to do it, which means it can be fully reusable. Yes. There are 2 configurations. One is a crewed configuration, and the other one is a cargo configuration. So that means the mass that they can bring down to the Moon is something like 20 ton and 30 ton if it's expendable. So that's about what it is. The Starship is 100 ton or 200 ton if it's expendable. So you're looking at least a 5-time difference, maybe even more if you're looking at only 30 ton. That's still a lot. I mean, that's so that's what it looks like. And now we can start to sort of break down what it is we're seeing in this image to get an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to me is just where they've got to put the rocket engines. It sort of reminds me of the ascent stage on the Apollo, where they just had a big thing sitting in the middle of their tiny little compartment that was the ascent engine. So they must have something like that at the bottom of the stage.
Yes. Okay. So that's kind of clear, is that we're kind of looking at this, say, okay, so where are the rocket engines? Where are they hidden? And what are the tanks and everything else? So we know it's using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen.
Right.
And typically,
the hydrogen, of course, being the larger.
The hydrogen tank is always the bigger. Yeah. I mean, even though it's the lighter of them, for some reason, volumetrically, it's terrible. So up here, we have the hydrogen tank, and down here, we have the oxygen tank. And we'll look at it a little bit closer and kind of look at some of the details. We can see 4 landing legs. We can see the ladder that comes down here. And down here, we're assuming there's some sort of, propulsive unit down here or rocket engine to be able to land it. We can sort of see where the windows are and everything else. And we'll do close-ups. And right here, we can also see there's some kind of fins that are supposed to be meant for something. And it's not 100% clear. There were some indications of the press conference of what's going on, but we'll look at them a little bit closer. The first thing I want to do is let's start from the top and go down.
Yeah.
So what do you see up here?
Well, we got the comms, we got the lights.
High gate antenna.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously lighting for the area, so that's cool. And some sort of docking mechanism up there, but hard to tell. Well,
it's docking or refueling. It's not clear. Right. I don't know if it's docking. It would mean crew is going to be going through there, or is it just for refueling.
Yeah,
we don't know.
Boy, I really hope the crew doesn't go through there, because could you imagine how cold that would be? A little tiny tube to crawl through with negative, what is it? 3 degrees Kelvin for hydrogen?
Oh,
or 6?
it gets pretty cold.
Yeah.
And then we have what looks like these flaps. So right here is a pivot point for this arm that comes out here, and this opens up. And the question is, well, what are these things? And I was trying to look at it and think, well, are they solar panels? Well, that doesn't look like a solar panel on this side.
I would imagine they're radiative cooling.
Yeah, but radiative cooling, one of the sides would be black. And we can see here what looks like silver foil or aluminum foil on the inside. And as we go down, here's another close-up of the bottom part of the flaps. It seems to indicate they all have the same surface properties, at least on the inside. They were saying something about that the backside are where the solar panels are. So it lands in a certain configuration of the moon that you're facing the sun. And this is a side that's in the shade, so you won't have that. Right. And then I guess maybe you would have that to reflect any heat coming up from the lunar regolith, because evidently the moon is hot, someone told me, which maybe from a radiative standpoint. So if you want to make sure your solar panels don't overheat, that's to prevent it.
You could think about it because it's clearly got a foil backing on the inside and it's white on the outside. So the white rejects the heat from the sun. The foil will reflect the cold of, it's specifically on the liquid hydrogen.
It'll reflect the heat. See, that's the thing. That this is the conundrum, is that when you're putting it out there, you're afraid that you have a hot surface. And so that any heat that's coming
but I'm
up,
thinking if it's facing, not when it's open, but when it's actually facing inward against that.
Oh, when it's facing inwards,
right. No, but think about it. So what you could have here, let me actually share, stop sharing.
It'll be like the literal space blanket. It's like that people like wrapping themselves into either kind of.
That's what but I'm thinking the opposite. So, so imagine this thing's got a foil inside. Mm-hmm. It's right against that liquid hydrogen. Very, very cold. It's reflecting the cold back in.
Yes.
If you get boil off, you can basically just open and close that a little bit to adjust the amount of heat that's escaping.
It's possible that they're using it for that when it's actually in orbit. And then when it comes down the surface, it looks like it's going to open up. If they're going to radiate, I would think that those top surfaces would be black, because they have
but I'm saying I think it's the opposite of radiation. I think what they're doing is trying to keep it as cold as possible. And that's
but the radiation, see where I'm thinking. So part of it could be that it's a blanket, but you already have it kind of wrapped up in a blanket. I'm thinking from the standpoint of when you want to have radiators for what could be the cryo boil off. So I'm wondering if this is part of the boil off system. So that means you've got a heat pump, which means you've got something that has to be able to reject a lot of heat.
Right. And
one of the best places to be able to reject a lot of heat is into the darkness of space. There's nothing better than that. But the best way to radiate energy from a surface is you want to make sure the surface is black and not silver, because basically the silver is reflecting that heat sort of back into you. You don't want that. And, unless they have some other kind of properties of that, to me, it was like odd. It's like, it seems like it should be radiators, but it's also looks a little bit different. Let me go back to the share.
Right. I'm remembering an analogy with bees. Because bees will do that, they'll adjust their wing position to adjust the heat that they have. So it seems like it's kind of along those lines to me.
You could do that. And the question is, if they're using this for coolant, it's really hard to see where the plumbing would go through there.
Right.
And the thing is, remember, this is all an artist render. So I don't know if there's like a coolant loop or what's going on here. So you could be absolutely right. It's just like it's your space blanket and they're kind of coming in and hugging. And the other side is where they have the solar panels. But because they have something with boil off, they need some sort of radiator somewhere. And we're not seeing it anywhere in here. So that's why I was thinking those must be the radiators. That would make sense. But they don't look like radiators to me.
Right.
So this is a mystery. So
it's also just FYI, this is also very heavy. Those 4 panels, that's a lot of extra weight they're putting on this. So it obviously must do something very important, or else they wouldn't add that weight.
If it's just an insulative blanket, just make it thicker around here.
Right.
It seems like you do the same thing, you make it more permanent. So there is some reason they're supposed to extend. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And then, of course, you see the truss structure in here to reduce weight. So the tanks are really exposed because you don't have to have any aerodynamic properties. You're not going through the atmosphere, so you don't have to worry about it. So we have this tank. Now, this is the oxygen tank. And I suspect this oxygen tank is a torus or a donut. And the reason is that you always have issues with plumbing. So you need to be able to get the hydrogen fuel down to here. And that means in many cases, they actually run the plumbing through the other tank.
Right.
But that means like more holes, more things that can go wrong. Why not just go ahead and make this a torus, and that way the plumbing is going right through there without actually going inside the oxygen tank. Now, the Saturn V, you look at it, they actually have 5 oxygen pipes going from the oxygen tank through the kerosene tank out to the engine. So you need to have good plumbing, no doubt about it. So I suspect that whether that means this is also a torus to allow the crew to go up and through here, I don't think so, because I'd be kind of a waste of space and everything else. So I think the docking port at the top is probably just for refueling. Now, the question is this, like, well, then how do you fuel the oxygen tank? And that's going to be interesting to see where that plumbing is. Is that if it's going up through there, does it have to then go through the hydrogen tank to get down there as well? And I think you wouldn't want to. Now, one of the reasons you would stack the hydrogen tank on top is to reduce the length of the plumbing. So that means if we turn it around, that means the plumbing for the oxygen becomes a lot longer. Plumbing for the hydrogen tank is a lot shorter. So that's like one way of being able to spare everything. That's why you would turn it around. There may be some reasons as far as mass distribution and stuff like that, but I think that kind of trumps it all. Okay.
And then, the really interesting thing to me, what comes next is the crew habitation area, which looks almost like the, oh gosh, what's the name of the company that has the blow up, almost like balloons?
It's not Axiom. Yeah, it'll come to me.
Geez. I feel bad that I can't remember that.
We'll remember.
Yes. But it looks to me like maybe it's not a solid structure. Maybe it's more of a balloon on the top, not the bottom. Just the very, that part up there. And it just could be that it's wrapped in a blanket. But
I think so, that it's a pressurized hull. So you're going to have some sort of shape like that in order for it to be. So I don't think it's inflated. There's probably some insulation between it. And now there's not much we can kind of tell from here. So the first thing, we don't really know what's going on. We can't see the engines. Like, we're looking at this bottom skirt here.
Unless those things that are sticking out the sides of the bottom skirt are the engines themselves, and there's just 4 of them.
I was wondering, and I don't think they are, because to me, it looks like those are just covers for the landing legs. The landing legs go right in
where they're sticking out.
If the engine is there, it's awfully close to that. So really, I would think it would be somewhere else. So for some reason, they decided that, and I'm not sure why you need covers. I guess maybe to protect those mechanisms from dust. You can see right here where the clips are. So when it's folded up, you can see it kind of jutting out here, another one here, another one there. So they're able to clip in. It's interesting that they're in gold foil, just like the original lunar lander. And usually when it's in gold foil, it's because you really want to make sure to reflect away any incoming heat. You don't want it to get hot. And normally that would be for very sensitive components and for fuel tanks and everything else where you're trying to regulate the thermal properties. And I'm like, it's just legs. I mean, there's probably like carbon composite or something like that. It's like, is it really that much of a problem? But evidently it is. Maybe the exposure to the sun or something like that can be a lot to compromise. So I'm surprised to see how much gold foil is down here for thermal management. But we cannot see the engines popping out at all.
The odd thing is that then you look at the ladder that's out, and it just looks like basic tubular aluminum. It doesn't look, there's no wrapping, nothing fancy about it at all.
Exactly. And maybe it's because it's wear and tear, because gold foil is really thin and will tear various. I don't know. It's to me, it's a conundrum that you have some silver components here and others that need to be wrapped, and it's for heating, not for cooling. And if you've got any sort of grease in there, the last thing you want it to be is like super cold, because then you won't be able to have the grease working part. And that's what they had to be careful in space, is they had a lot of components where they did have some lubricants, and those lubricants would freeze up on you rather than behaving as a lubricant. So thermal management is always a problem. Now, what we see down here is that this here looks like an airlock, or let's say rather a docking port. So this is probably the docking port to the lunar gateway. So this is where the crew is able to go in and out to the lunar gateway. Over here, you clearly have another airlock that allows them to go out to the surface. So there's 2 points of entry and egress for different purposes. I don't think there's a third one up on the top, because that would be a bit too superfluous. And I think just adds extra complexity and mass and everything else. It's not going to be there.
And I think it's important to make a note here that this lander is designed to land at a pole, probably South Pole.
The South Pole.
Where the poles are, it's going to be facing, one side will be facing the sun pretty much permanently, which means that the solar panels are likely on the backside where the ladder is that you can't see right here, but that they basically will stay staring at the sun the whole time. They won't have to.
I'm trying to think, because they're supposed to be there for 30 days. So I think they're going to change because the moon is always facing the earth.
Right.
But as it goes around, it's going to go into shadow. I mean, so it's always kind of in the sun, but the sun is going to kind of orbit around it.
It does. I do have to think about that a little bit, but I mean, that was the explanation for why you can't see solar panels, is because they're all on the other side. But
they said it was on the other side, but I'm kind of wondering myself, well, wait a minute. Yeah, it's you always have sun and you always kind of have shadow just because of the geometric configuration of a crater down at the South Pole prevents the sun from ever getting in there. But if you go to the rim of the crater, you can always see the sun the entire time. So you're not like on the dark side of the moon.
But it very well could be rotating.
And part of it is also the vibration that's going on as it orbits around. So you have these very rare areas that you always have enough sun that you can run the solar panels. But I think you are going to have to move them around. So if they're talking about a 30-day stay, they're going to have to move those around. So now the other thing that was interesting is I looked here at the windows. What do you see up here in the windows?
It looks like shades to me. I would guess.
I mean, that was the first thing I said, like, oh, there must be shades, filters or something like that for the sun.
Right.
And I thought about it. I thought, well, wait a minute. Why put them on the outside? I mean, if you need a filter, just put it on the inside and that would be it.
Well, I thought maybe to protect it, during the landing and stuff, so it doesn't get all beat up.
It's not so much a shade as it is, I think, some kind of blast shielding. So it's really there to probably protect it. The other kind of shading.
Oh, you know what the other reason why is? Look at where the docking port is. You're going to have to use RCS thrusters as you come into that docking port, and you'll blast the heck out of those windows with the RCS.
And when you're coming down, the lunar regolith will also be getting kicked up. So it might be some protection for that. I would think if you really need to, to darken it or have shade, you can use smart shades.
Right.
I mean, Boeing is involved. I have seen them in the cruise liner, so I think they know where to get them. So I have a feeling it's more or less blast protection, and it may be that they're still see-through. So you can still see through it, but it's just to make sure the glass doesn't get damaged for whatever.
I have to say I'm a little disappointed because that was the spot where I expected to zoom in and find an Easter egg. And I was a little sad that the national team did not. I thought inside there would be like a Kerbal guy or something like that you'd be able to see in the background.
Exactly. I don't see anything in there as well. Yeah. So now let me see the next slide. So I think I kind of zoomed in a little bit, maybe now. The one thing about this is we've seen a lot of details on here. What's missing?
Oh, well, the RCS, the reaction control thrusters, I believe are there, but it's really hard. I think down at the bottom.
Where?
Right down at the very bottom with the gold foil, and I'm not so sure on top.
So?
Maybe, I think on the side. Look over on the side. I think those little things look like fire. Sprinkler.
No, those aren't RCS. Those are the clips for when these are not deployed, but when they come in. Yes. Okay. So there's no RCS thrusters. These are definitely not engines. These seem to be some sort of dust covers.
It's a magic spaceship. It just levitates.
These here, apparently these are probably lights. So you can see this light is on. And if we go up to the midsection, we clearly cannot see any RCS thrusters.
Well, you don't want anything in the middle anyway. That would be... you sure there's nothing?
Yeah. You want it away from the center of gravity.
Isn't that thing like dead center in the picture between the two lights? Wouldn't those be?
It's hard to tell. I mean, this here also looks suspicious because it's only pointing in one direction, and you need to have them going in multiple directions to be able to get the control. So, my reply is like they figured out where to place the lights, but not the RCS thrusters yet.
Right.
And for everyone that wants to know what is an RCS thruster, well,
you can see
right here on this design. These are clear as day. Boom, there, there, and there might be some others that are on there. So you need those to be able to control the vehicle in space. Its attitude, changes directions. For the
and especially when you look at something that size that's going SSTO, and landing too, you're going to need some significant control authority on that because it's a big boy. So you need one at the top and the bottom.
Right. Now you could do a little bit of control with the main engines, maybe some gimbling to do stuff like that, but you can't get all of it. You still need to have it unless they've come up with something really, mystical to be able to control it. Especially when you're doing docking. When you're doing docking, you're not using your main engines. The whole idea is you have something that just changes, has a small amounts of thrust to be able to allow you to go forwards and backwards. So it basically is your forward and your reverse, and it's your ability to turn in 3 different directions.
Right.
So it's a mystery on how they're doing that. It seems to be covered up in maybe something that is so novel they don't want to reveal it to anyone yet.
Right.
Especially you and me, we'd be in there trying to figure everything out about it. But that's sort of where it is. Now, getting back to, the crew compartment, we look down here and we cannot see the engines, but we're assuming there must be engines there. There's nowhere else for the engines.
Right.
So they have to be around somewhere. And that means if the engines are down here, then that means, they're not sticking out underneath the skirt. They're not sticking down. They seem to be well placed up here.
Right.
And it would make you wonder, it's like, well, that means the engines actually intrude, especially if it's a single engine, it's going to intrude somewhere in here. There's some speculation they might actually be having 3 engines or maybe 4 engines. That way you have a little bit of control. And also that the amount of thrust that you need coming down to the lunar surface is going to be a lot more than you need to go out, because on the way down, you're much heavier and everything else. At that point, maybe if you dropped out cargo, you're going to be lighter. So you don't need as much thrust to be able to get off. And you can only throttle down these engines so much. So usually the best way to do it is just like turn one of them off. So means,
but also let's just remember that you've got to have downcomer tubes. Like every engine's going to have plumbing coming through there, which means that the living space is a lot more compromised than you might think it is, because there's going to be all this stuff coming right through the middle of what they're doing.
Coming in here, and it's either going straight down or around the sides, or we don't know. And looking in here, you were hoping you would see something. So I assume there is like a central column right in the middle that just comes straight on down. And then underneath it, there might almost be like a little table. It's sort of like you say, the downcomers are there.
Right.
And then there's going to be some other platform on which the engines are actually underneath. And you might say, well, that sounds crazy. That means the combustion chamber is actually in the crew compartment.
Right.
And it's something that NASA would never agree to.
Well,
and you would be absolutely wrong, because they already did back in the 60s, because the ascent stage of the lunar module, the engine that was in there really was inside at least it was kind of covered up, but intruded in there. Right. So, for the most part, they said, look, if something goes wrong with that thing, everyone's toast anyway. So it doesn't matter whether it's actually right in the crew space or not. That's the only way you can deal with it. So I'm expecting there is some intrusion into the crew compartment from the engines. And
the one thing that actually brings back to mind, though, in the 60s, the Apollo lunar module ascent stage was hypergolic. It was dead simple. This thing is going to be hydrolox, which is not dead simple. In fact, just to light it and to keep it from exploding, if you're mixing oxygen and hydrogen in the lunar environment before you ignite it, there's a chance of a hard start, an explosion on the back end. So, you have to do it more complicated.
And it depends upon what kind of cycle they have. They're going to have some sort of pumps. And you need to run those things. And the question is, they might need to have some helium on board, because usually they use the helium to start up the turbines, but they may have another way to do it. But here's the kicker, John. The RCS thrusters are going to be hydrolux.
Okay. Oh, so they're not going to, so you think it's going to be a completely single, dual propellant, but they're not going to use hypergolics for the RCS or anything.
Evidently, that from some of the things I read, and that was kind of surprising. That's like, oh my goodness. You've never done that before, because you definitely need a really good ignition system. Right. Because you're just kind of doing a puff.
But are you thinking cold gas thrusters instead, though? Would it just be?
I don't know if it's cold gas, but they're saying that they're actually going to use hydraulic, because if it's cold gas, then just use either the hydrogen or the oxygen. If you're going to bother mixing them, then you may as well ignite them to get a little bit more specific impulse out of them. But you don't, I guess with the RCS thrusters, it doesn't matter. You can almost do it, since you're not going to be using them to actually land the vehicle.
Yeah, why not take a cheat code out of SpaceX's playbook and use the just monopropellant, use cold gas / warm gas thrusters?
It could be. So that we don't know. Of course, we don't even know the placement of where they are, but I saw in one source that looks like there's not going to be any hypergolics on here. There's
Wow.
not going to be
Well,
any other
for the
propellants.
long-term viability of something that's reusable, that's actually a very good idea, because hypergolic is
Yes,
terrible
yes,
for, and you
yes,
can't
yes.
refuel it either.
Right, right.
I mean,
Now the one thing I kind of wonder by having, let's say, the rocket engines kind of intrude a little bit into the crew compartment.
right.
If there's anything wrong, you could just like open up the hatch and get in there with a wrench and do whatever.
I see a
you
guy
know,
with like a
knock on
wrench
it,
there
up,
banging on it or
change the
something.
spark plug, whatever you have to do, close it back up. And so maybe you can actually do the maintenance. But whereas, in the lunar module, because they had hypergolics, nothing was going to go wrong. All you had to do is mix those two together and you were going to get ignition and everything else.
Right.
So this is going to be a bit more complicated. And of course, the boil off is really interesting because they said something about a 20-degree Kelvin coolant radiator, which is incredibly cold. But I guess you can kind of do it in space because you're already tapping into what can theoretically be a cold source. But what I'd like to see is, where are the radiators, and are they hidden in here somewhere, or something else is going on that we're not noticing? So that's what I got. I mean, how long did we take this time, John?
I don't even know. Honestly, half hour, maybe something like that. We'll see how long it is.
So that was like one image. Okay, we
Yeah.
threw other images in there, but basically to kind of back up our speculation about what is really this one single image.
And I honestly, yeah, it's the levitation of this thing that's the part that blows my mind, because they kind of show us most of it, but you don't see any of the main descent engine or engines, and you don't see any RCS thrusters, and it's like, wait a second. So they clearly did not want people to know what was going on, because they would have shown us images otherwise. You can see in the original application that image showed a lot of detail about those kinds of things. With this one, no, not at all.
Yes. So there seems to be a lot of details that they do not want to release yet.
Right.
And it may be for more than just competitive reasons, but it may be also that they've come up with something that they don't want any other countries to know about at this point. It may be.
Right.
Or there's still details they have to iron out. So they may be confident they can do that. We shall see. It's a very, it's got some very positive and good aspects to it. I hope they didn't forget the engines. The RCS. It's like, oh my goodness, we got to put those things in. No, they just had the crew compartment down below. So let's hope they've got.
Right. What do you think about? I mean, I assume with computer controlled like gimbaling and stuff, it's not a big deal. But the first thing I looked at with that was like, oh my gosh, that thing's going to be top heavy, because most of the weight at the beginning is all on the top instead of on the bottom. So the whole thing is going to be extremely top heavy. And then as the fuel goes down, it's going to become more and more bottom heavy.
Change.
So
it's
going to make a very, very significant difference to the. Anyway, I mean, I know you're always balancing a room, and you're doing this thing.
And I don't know where the cargo is, whether the cargo is all internal and then everyone has to bring it out, because 20 tons of cargo is an awful lot for the astronauts to have to pull out through the airlock or something like that. So I'm wondering if around there's some compartments where there is the payloads that they would be bringing down, and if so, then, and of course it might be a different configuration. There might be the 30-ton cargo that just goes down with no crew whatsoever, or maybe they're able to go over and remove it. I assume there's a little bit that they come down with the crew, so that might help to the balancing problem. Right. And I'm trying to think, is that really going to be a problem? When they land, there's going to be very little left, but there's going to be enough for them to go back up.
Right.
So it's probably not top heavy at that point. And when you're coming down, you're not going through the atmosphere or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about drag or anything wanting to flip you around. You should be able to control that.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's just without being able to see the RCS, you feel like you really, really are going to have RCS thrusters at the very top.
They got to be there. They got to be there. And I'm hoping they come out, because pretty soon there's just going to be memes that, oh, look, they forgot the RCS thrusters. How could I have to accept that? These guys know how to build a rocket or not.
Right. I do have to say that image kind of looks like an artist rendering that of a person who's not necessarily technically adept, where they're forgetting some major details.
Formed of what should be in there, but that's what I'm wondering when I'm looking at what are those radiators or fins that I might be taking it too literally as far as the color that's on there, and it might just be artistic license in that he had one fin, whoever was doing it, and just copy paste around, and they were all the same color,
Right.
not realizing that, oh, wait a minute, they're not all the same color. They have different aspects on the inside and outside. And maybe
Right.
it's like, we're not going to really reveal that information yet. And
Right.
again, right down to the gold foil on the bottom, was that just like really necessary or just a nice touch?
Yeah. I can't recall, did the Apollo, I know it had gold foil around the outside.
It had
of
gold
the
foil.
set, but did it have it on the actual legs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. On the legs and even on the landing pads, everything else. So it was the same. And it was always a mystery to me. I understood on the actual, body itself why they needed it.
Because you're rejecting
all the
heat.
tanks behind there. And
Yeah.
in some places they had black. So you had some
Right.
that were black and some that were silver, and some that were gold, depending upon the thermal management that was going on. So there were actually areas they wanted to absorb heat and bring
Right.
it in.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe.
So, that's what it got.
Yeah, there we go. So anyway, obviously, nobody knows for real at this point. Hopefully, Blue Origin will deign to allow us to see some more images. But knowing Blue Origin's history, they probably won't until they're actually ready to roll the thing out onto the test pad or something, because they are very
right. But at the same time, this is a publicly funded project, so there's going to have to be a certain amount of disclosure along the way. There are other companies involved, so I would think more's coming, and it might be that right up at the finish line, it's in the documentation somewhere else, and they decided this is all we want to review.
Well, one would hope, because if it's not in the documentation and that's the best that NASA had to go on, they should have picked Alpaca, because it's much more detailed. So
yeah. The Alpaca, you can see the RCS thrusters, you can see the engines that are on there.
Well, and it's just the whole layout is much more logical for the Alpaca. It's like, this makes sense. So
the Alpaca has engine out capability. This one, that's why there's a suspicion that there might be at least 3 engines for engine out capability.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Of course, that makes it really interesting. If you had an engine out on takeoff, it would be so imbalanced with only 3 engines. It would be very difficult for it to get off the lunar surface without tipping over. So,
I think the theory is that it can probably do it with just 2. So if one of them fails, and then the other one would.
No, I'm just saying if one failed on the way down and you landed, to get back up again.
Only
2, you could do a power slide off the launch site, because you.
No, I don't know how they're going to line them up, because if you have them kind of in a ring, then if one of them goes off, then you already have the imbalance. You're going to have to gimbal it to be able to get it to get the thrust vectoring. Otherwise, you do it in a straight line. Yeah. And then you would just say, okay, we're going to just do that.
Oh, that's true. A straight line would actually make more sense. Yeah.
It's going to be off. Then we have that. But then the problem is if the central engine has to come on again, you're going to get a little bit of that torque. So you want to have 2 of them on the straight line. Yeah. And if they go to 4 is another possibility. So they might have 4 around there, and you need 4 to come down and maybe 2 to go up. So there's all sorts of possibilities. But you need to think about, how do we do it to make sure it's a symmetric distribution of thrust? Yes. Otherwise, again, you get that power slide that you're going to see. Yeah.
Which you really, really don't want taken off from the moon. That's not ideal. So yeah, it would be very interesting. I do have to say that for the astronauts on board, it's going to be a wild ride, because they're going to be sitting on the engines. Those suckers are going to be like, their seats are probably going to be leaned back against these things. So they're going to feel the vibration more
than likely. Yeah. And that would sort of make sense. If you get that central pole that's coming down, that will be some sort of structure that you then would have the seats on. You're right. That'd probably be the best way.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess, actually the way the New Shepard is, where they've got their kind of like a ring of seats, that it might be along the lines of that, because again, they have the descent engine. Excuse me. They have the descent engine in the middle of that. So that same sort of scenario may make very good sense for the lunar lander as well. So yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So it's definitely a better design than the original. So we'll just be keeping tabs on it.
Yeah. Heck, that ladder looks like something I could have at my house. That looks great. The steps, not the ladder. Anyway, but we got that. So at least it shouldn't be dangerous once they're on the lunar surface. It looks like it's going to be easy. Actually, of all of them, even I think the Alpaca had a ladder. So that will be the easiest ingress and egress of all of them.
Well, the Alpaca actually had steps. So
did it have steps also? Okay, sorry, that's my bad. But I think they were more like just like the like just
But it was
steps.
so low to the surface. I think it was like 4
Right.
steps down.
Yeah, so it was really easy.
So they were side slung, so they were really close to the surface, which is
Right.
what a lot of people really liked about that design, is that
Yeah.
you literally could just like hop off and whoop, be right on the surface,
Right.
and probably hop back up if you had to.
Yep.
So I think it was like 4 steps.
Yeah. And that was totally reusable in their second design too, which is really cool. They didn't even have to drop the
Yes.
tanks. So it's kind of a
Mhm.
bummer. It's really a shame that they couldn't have gotten funded, because I think it's a lovely design. I really like that one.
Yeah.
So, yep.
I
All
agree.
righty. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. And like I said, I'll see you tomorrow in person, and we'll do something at the launch site. Who knows what, but we'll have some fun.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Anyway. All right. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.